Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. This is Alex from movetofranceandteachenglish.com, and I'm here today to tell you a bit of a story on how I became French by teaching English. That's right. I became a French citizen by working hard for 5 long years and applying to become a French citizen for another 2.5 years. And as of June 2026, I'm happy to say I finally got it. I'm finally a French citizen. So I want to tell you a bit of a story on how I got to this to become French. I'm going to start with a bit of my backstory if you don't know much about me, then talk about my education. I'm going to go through the timeline of events of teaching those 5 years at different universities across France, and then also the timeline for citizenship. So let's get started. So my story begins with my backstory. I was born in Washington, D.C. I am American. My father is Venezuelan. My mother is American. When I was 5 years old, I moved to France. So my father got a job working in an international organization in France, and that's how I lived in France for 6 years. Now, I went to an American international school, not a French school, but I did take French classes while I was there. And while I was in France, I didn't know it at the time, but I became a Francophile. I loved France. I loved going to the boulangerie and biking to the forest. And I just really loved all the architecture and food here. And I didn't know it at the time. I was only 5 years old, 5 years to 11 years of age. But I really connected with the French culture. When I was 11, I moved to Vienna, Austria, but I didn't have that same connection that I did in France. I lived there for another 6 years, and when I was finally 17 years old, I moved back to the United States and went to college and went to university, first getting my bachelor's and my master's before finally moving back to France to work and teach. So this experience of growing up in a world and countries that are not your passport country. So when I say passport country, I mean United States of America. That was my American passport. I did not live in the United States growing up from the years of 5 years of age to 17 years of age. So this term is a third culture kid, a TCK. So I became a TCK. I didn't know what it was at the time. Third culture kid means that you're not from the home country culture, you're not from your parents' culture, but you're somewhere in between. So that's that third culture that it mentions. It doesn't mean that you have three cultures, but I digress. So I grew up in Europe, basically. And when I came back to the US, I had to learn to be an American again because I never actually lived in the US except going to kindergarten, right? And so that's where I got my love of France and my love of Europe in general. It also made it a bit easier for me. When I went to Austria, I took 4 years of German, but I didn't want to lose my French. And so I spent 2 years learning French in Austria and 6 years learning French in France. That makes 8 years total. When I graduated high school and moved to the United States, I went to New Jersey for a year and then spent the rest of my years getting my bachelor's in business administration in Northeastern University in Boston. And so I didn't take any French classes there, but I still had a love for languages. I also took some Spanish in high school and in college, and I tried my best to not lose my German as well. So by the time that I graduated, I still had French, German, and Spanish that I spoke pretty well going into my master's and starting to work. So that's a bit of my backstory, my education, right? So I had a bachelor's and a master's, and I lived in France for 6 years of my childhood, and I learned French while I was living in France, right? Now, I know a lot of people don't have that opportunity, that luxury of being able to immerse themselves as a child and live in France or in a country where they're trying to learn the language. So I'm just presenting my perspective, but I could have lost everything when I moved at 11 or 12 years of age, but I didn't. I didn't want to. I loved languages. I loved practicing the language. And so I kept up with it. Just like going to the gym, I continued practicing my French and I never lost it. I took classes in Austria in high school, and I joined groups and went to meetups where I was able to continue practicing the language of French. So I never quite lost it, which was, something that I tried intentionally to do. I was able to maintain it. So that's my languages and that's my education. Now, after I finished my bachelor's in Boston, so I moved to New York and I got a CELTA. So a CELTA is a certificate for English language teaching to adults. You could do it intensively for 1 month. That's what I did. And you'll learn how to teach English as a second language. So since I did my bachelor's in business with a minor in psychology, I didn't really have the teaching background. I didn't know how to teach English. Obviously, English is my native language, but I needed to learn how to teach English, the grammar, the pedagogy, classroom management, phonetics, phonology, that kind of stuff. So I was able to get a job as a substitute teacher in Boston, teaching at a private language school there. From that, I was able to work part-time, but enough hours to make it really full-time in Boston for about a year and a half. But I realized, this 1 month of training is not enough for me. I want to go back to school and I want to study it properly. So that's when I went back to New York, and I got a master's in TESOL. So that's the Master of Arts in TESOL at Columbia University's Teachers College. So that's where I got my master's. So at this point, I have a master's, a bachelor's, and a CELTA, which shows that I know how to teach English and that I have a master's degree, which qualifies me for certain jobs in France. If you follow the channel or my blogs or anything else, you know that I talk a lot about two different types of positions, the lecteur de langue and the Maitre de Langue positions in France. And so one of the qualifications to become a Maitre de Langue is having a master's. So I had that. After I finished my master's in New York, I moved to Washington, D.C. I moved in with my then-time girlfriend, and I started teaching at different private language schools for about another year and a half. And that brings us to 2018. So at that point, I've been teaching ESL from 2013 up until 2018. So it's about 5 years on and off, not full-time, but a lot of between part-time and full-time English teaching experience. And my students were from all over the world. They were not just French, although I had some French students. I had Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Brazilian, Portuguese, German, Libyan, Saudi. So just countries from all over the world, Asia, a bit of Africa, a lot of Europe, a lot of Eastern Europe as well, a lot of Russian and Turkish. They were great. So I really, really enjoyed teaching all these different people from different places around the world and learning a bit about their different cultures. But that's how I was able to find out about the Maitre de Langue position. So when I graduated with my master's, I was on a listserv that I got from Columbia University, and that's how I found out about the Maitre de Langue position. And so I'm telling you all this because that's kind of my backstory of how I got my CV to prepare myself to apply for the Maitre de Langue. I lived in France for 6 years. I was able to keep a B1, B2 level of French. I lived in France before. I had a bachelor's, I had a master's, and I had a CELTA. And so that made me a very good candidate when I applied for the Maitre de Langue position. So now I'm going to transition from my backstory and my education to step one, which is to get French citizenship, you need to work and pay taxes for 5 years. Okay. Now, the Maitre de Langue position only qualifies you. You can only do the Maitre de Langue position for 2 years. Now, some universities also allow you to do 2 years of lecteur and then 2 years of Maitre de Langue. Usually they're not at the same place. You would do 2-year lecteur in one university in France and then 2 years Maitre de Langue in another university in France. But not all universities allow this. Some universities say either you have to do lecteur or Metz, but you can't do both. If you've done one, you can't do the other at any university anywhere in France. So I was able to apply, and what happened was I got second place. So what they do is when you apply to one of these Maitre de Langue positions, I had a very short interview on the phone without any preparation. I didn't know it was coming, really, because of the time difference. I woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning. No, I'm sorry. I woke up at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and I saw an email at 3 in the morning saying that I had an interview at 12. So during a 15-minute break in between classes, I was able to do a very quick phone call interview. It wasn't even Zoom or anything like now. It would probably be Zoom, but that's all I had time for. And so that was my interview. And so I was ranked second. And then a week or two later, I got an email saying that the first ranked position, the person who they offered the job to, declined, which meant it passed to me. And so, of course, I was very happy, and I was like, okay, absolutely, I will take the position. So then, as I was living with my girlfriend at the time, we had to figure out how we would be able to go to France together. And so things have been going well. We've been living together. And so we decided, okay, let's get married so that we can legally live in France together, go on this journey together. We talked about leaving the United States already. It's something we wanted to do. I lived abroad already. She really wanted to go live abroad. And because I knew French, it would make it easier. I wouldn't have to learn the language that much. I just had to brush up on it. And then I can translate for her if she needed it. And so that's what we did. I didn't know anything about Strasbourg at the time. I'd just been to Paris. I lived in Paris for 6 years, and then I traveled around a couple different places like Mont Saint-Michel and Giverny, so kind of nearer to Paris, or Normandy area, so not too far by car. I had never been to Strasbourg before. So just so you know, Strasbourg is a city at the border of France on the east side in the area called Alsace, and it's right next to Germany. In fact, you can take the street train and go from France into Germany without your passport or anything, which is really cool. So anyways, that was the first step. I had to do 2 years teaching as a Maitre de Langue in the University of Strasbourg in Strasbourg. And that was an amazing experience. So step one was getting my foot in the door, right? So my foot in the door in France was those first 2 years as a Maitre de Langue. Now, after my first 2 years, I did apply to some places, and I got a couple offers as a lecteur de langue. But the pay is 300 euros less, and I wasn't sure at the time about the visa legality situation. So what ended up happening is, during this time of uncertainty, where it looked like they were offering me a position, I found another position that was contractual, and this was the same salary as Maitre de Langue, except a little bit more, but it was in Corsica. And so I ended up turning down the position as a lecteur because of that uncertainty of, can I be a lecteur or not, and how does France view it and whatnot. I think it probably would have been fine if I went into lecteur position, but because the contractual position was around the same time, I went with the contractual position, and it was in Corsica. Corsica is an island in the Mediterranean. It's called l'île de beauté, which means the island of beauty. And how could you pass up an opportunity like that, right? So we packed our bags and we moved from Strasbourg to Corsica. Now, finding an apartment and figuring out how to live in Corsica is a story for another time, which maybe I'll tell at some time, which involved learning how to drive in France and passing a French driving test and finding a car in very short notice, because public transportation doesn't really exist in Corsica. It's extremely, extremely limited. But anyways, that was my next step. And so contractual positions, I learned, you have to do twice the amount of work as Maître de Langue. So instead of 192 hours per year, it's 384, I believe. But the thing is that you can do it up to 3 years. Now, some universities, it's kind of a gray line. Like, they might try to do a bit more if they can't find any other person. I heard of some people in the University of Corsica, Pascal Poli, what's the name? University Pascal Poli in Corsica, that did it for like 4 or 5 years. They're not really supposed to hire you for that long without offering you a more permanent position. But I know that at least up to 3 years is possible. So I did it for 1 year, and we loved Corsica, but it was a bit isolating. And then we ended up doing it for a second year, and it was good. But then we said, okay, we need to leave the island. We need to see more of France. You know, Corsica feels like its own thing, and I loved France, and Corsica is really great too, but it's harder to get around, right? You have to take a ferry 7 hours across the Mediterranean just to get to Nice or in one of those other port cities in the south of France or Italy, even. So that was the contractual job for 2 years. Um, so then I did my final 5th year in the University of Pau and Pays des Ardennes, so UPPA, and their campus that I taught at was in Bayonne. So just like Bayonne, New Jersey, it's spelled the same, but this is Bayonne. It's in the southwest of France, near the border with Spain. So I did near the border of Germany with Strasbourg and Alsace. I did Corsican culture and island in the Mediterranean. And now I did it ended up being 1 year only at the University of Pau and Pays des Ardennes, Bayonne campus. And so I really enjoyed that for that year. And that was very strong Basque culture, which if you don't know, the Basque language is its own language, very different from any of the Latin or Greek language roots. And so that was very interesting, but it still didn't quite feel like home. I did have a chance to renew, and the more stable thing would have been to renew for a second year, but we ended up deciding to go for another position that moved us a bit closer to Paris, and just a different culture and different city. So you might say, well, Alex, you did the 5 years. Why do you have to keep on going? Well, I did do 5 years, but then I have to apply. And if I'm applying to become a French citizen, I need legal residence and legal status still active in France, which means I need to do another year of teaching English and making sure my legal status is active, and that I have a place to live to get mail and have a legal residence, right? And this is what's going to lead me into step 3. So step 2 was contractual jobs. Step 1 was my foot in the door, Maitre de Langue. And step 3 is starting to apply. So at this point, I'm spending 1 year at the University of Lorraine. And Lorraine has 2 campuses in Nancy and in Metz. Both Metz and Nancy are in the Lorraine region. If you know Quiche, Lorraine, that's where that's from. It's not far from the area of Champagne, where they make champagne. And it's right next to Alsace. And actually, all 3 areas, Champagne, Lorraine, and Alsace, are part of the Grand East region, Grand Est. So it's the same kind of region, but still different departments. Anyways, so in Metz is when I apply officially for the citizenship. And this is in November of 2023 at this point. So it'd been 5 years, and then it took a couple of months to get all my paperwork together. Once I had passed the 5-year mark with contracts, and there's a whole other process, which I'm going to talk about, which is the next step, the applications. And so I lived in Metz for 1 year, and then I got another position in Amiens, which is about 2 hours by driving 1 hour by train north of Paris. Now, Amiens was really nice. I liked it a bit more than Metz. It was comparable, but every time that we moved, we decided to live in the city where I was working. So that was Strasbourg, Corsica, so we lived near Corte, which is the center of Corsica, for a few months, but the house we lived in was not very well insulated. We had issues with temperature and electricity and internet. So we moved somewhere that was a bit further away by the ocean, but much better living conditions. And then we lived in Guétari, which is a small town about 30 minutes outside of Bayonne, near Biarritz. And so when we lived in Metz, we lived pretty much in Metz proper. When we moved, however, we finally decided this time, so this is, let's see, Strasbourg, Corsica, Bayonne. This is move 4 at this point. We decided we're going to live in a place that we want to live. And if I need to commute, I'll just commute. So we ended up choosing the town of Le Chesnay, which is just out next to Versailles. And in this town where we chose an apartment, we loved living in the Versailles area. And I would commute to Amiens, about a 3-hour commute one way, and stay in an Airbnb or a hotel during the week when I had classes. And then on weekends and when there was no classes, so like May, June, July, August, I'd come back and live in the apartment proper. Now, this is one of the challenges of moving around. And if you're with a partner, making sure they're happy as well. So you're doing something that you want to do together. I'm very fortunate that my wife was very flexible to be able to come with me. Basically, I dragged her to every different place. And she had to come with me because I had to find a job to allow me to live in France, to allow us to live in France. And so she came with me to Corsica and to Guétry near Bayonne and to Metz. And then finally we said, okay, let's find a place that we both really enjoy. And we chose Versailles area. And then I commuted. And so that ended up being a year, close to 2 years, because, yeah, we didn't know how long it was going to take. And ended up being, I got my citizenship on June 5th, 2026. So that's 2 years and 7 months, practically, which seems like a long time now that I think about it. So that's going to lead me to step 3 again, which is the citizenship application process. So after 5 years of living, teaching, and working in France with stable 1-year contracts, I was able to apply for citizenship. And I needed a whole dossier. I needed a FBI background check from the US because I'm American, from the United States. Like I was born in Washington, D.C. I needed my official birth certificate. I needed my official marriage certificate with the apostille, which proved that it was recognized internationally. I needed the birth certificates of my parents, both of them. I needed all of these documents translated by an official translator into French, and I needed to send them all these documents. I needed to take pictures, official pictures of myself, my profile, to send to them with the application. At the same time I'm doing this, I have to renew my 1-year visa for myself and my wife every year. And throughout this 2.5-year process, I had to send them the updated visa whenever I could. So sometimes the visa wasn't ready, but my visa had expired. And what happens during those situations is they give you what's called like a récépissé. And so it's kind of like a receipt that you combine with your expired visa. And that qualifies as a new visa until your actual new visa is printed and ready for pickup. To pick it up, you need to make an appointment at the prefecture, and that takes months as well. So it's a whole process. For a year, this last visa that I got, I applied and I sent the information in August. It was accepted in September. My visa expired in October, and then it wasn't ready for pickup until January, and then I couldn't get an appointment until February. So I got the visa, the actual visa, in February, which is going to expire in October of this year. So it's a bit of a long process. It's not always that long. It really depends. And also keep in mind throughout this whole timeline of events that COVID happened. So 2020 was COVID. I was finishing up my second year of Strasbourg. And then we moved to Corsica. The first year of the university in Corsica, we had COVID round 2 with closures and switching to online and all this stuff. So that was the whole process. It was quite a challenging thing to go through. The most difficult thing I would say was uncertainty and patience. Throughout this whole process, I never knew for sure if I would be accepted or denied. I didn't see why I would be denied, but you never know. You hear stories, and nothing was ever guaranteed, right? So I submitted in November, and then I had to be very patient. I waited November, December, January, February, March, April. 6 months later, I heard back finally online, and they said that I was missing multiple documents. I don't remember what they were, but they needed apostille and they needed more certified documents. I forget what. And so I immediately got those very quickly. I found a great French translator that was certified, and she was able to do a very quick 48-hour turnaround, and I got the documents to them. Then I didn't hear back until March the following year. So that's May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. That's almost 11 months. I heard in the fall that my documents were finally accepted, but I didn't hear anything about the next step, which was the interview, until March. Oh, and by the way, one of the documents you need to submit is a language test. So I had to test a minimum of B1. And so I took a language test. And if you're above B1, they don't tell you what you actually get. They just say you reached B1. So yeah, I actually took the test twice because I was afraid that the first one had expired. It turns out it didn't, because it only lasts 2 years. But if you submit it, even if it expires, if you submitted it on time, then that's fine. But anyway, that's another story. So there's all these documents that I have to use to apply. So this is the timeline. Then in March of 2025, I get invited for an interview. The interesting thing is that at this point, I am now living near Versailles. I applied when I was in Metz in November. I left Metz. So this is November of 2023. I applied while I was in Metz. In August of 2024, I moved from Metz to Versailles, and I lived in Versailles 2024, 2025, 2025, 2026. Because I had applied in Metz, the main prefecture near Metz is actually in Nancy. So they said, either you have to restart everything all over again, or you just come to the prefecture in Nancy to do your interview. And I said, absolutely, I will go to the ends of the earth to have the interview. Going to Nancy for a day is not a problem. So I went. So I took a train from Paris out to Nancy. I had the interview. It went very well. It was very stressful. Now, I want to add at this point that at the time I was doing the citizenship process, in the interview itself, they will ask you 2 types of questions. They'll ask you about yourself, your family situation, and your integration into France. Like, do you go to the gym, or do you go to any clubs? Do you have any friends? Where you live? Have you made any friends? And if you're with a partner, do they speak French? What do they do? Have they integrated as well? And what are your plans professionally and socially in the future? That's the one part. The other part is they will quiz you on French knowledge. Now, they give you a booklet, and you have to study the booklet very carefully. I learned all about all the different prime ministers in the government at the time, and I learned all kinds of information about the history of France, the culture of France, laïcité, how religion and government are separate. So rules like that. As of this taping, which is June 2026, they just announced in January, February of this year that not only were they increasing the language level requirement from B1 to B2, but also that instead of quizzing you on French history, culture, and civics in the interview, they're doing that separately. So now you have a 40-question test, just like a driver's license test. It's the same 40-question kind of setup, I think, multiple choice. And if you pass, I guess, 34, 36 out of the 40 questions, I don't know the passing rate, then you get a certificate. And then when you go to the interview, you don't have to talk about the civics part. So now those two are separated. But when I was doing the interview, they were together. So they actually asked me about my favorite French female historical figures. So one of them that I said was Jeanne d'Arc. And I forget the second person I mentioned, but it was really interesting because, I studied everything, so I knew of French historical figures, but I was surprised that they asked me specifically about female historical figures as opposed to male. They also didn't ask me about any specific presidents or the timeline of presidents, but they did ask me to mention a few cabinet ministers. So it's good I studied that. But anyways, that's what you can kind of expect. So the interview was the last hurdle. After the interview in May of 2025, I heard nothing. And then it was almost a year. So by May 2026, I got an email saying, hey, we need a couple more documents. There's a timeline on the online portal with the different stages. I could see it reach the final stages. And they said, we need these 2 documents. One of which was a document that needed to be translated. And I said, wait a minute, this document sounds really familiar. And I looked in my files and I had translated it 2 years ago. So I don't know if they lost it or the different department didn't see that document in my dossier or whatever. But I said, oh, no problem. Here it is again. Here you go. I submitted this back in 2023, but here you go again in 2026. I guess maybe you lost it or something. No problem. Whatever you need, I have it for you. That was kind of my attitude. It's whatever you need, I will provide it. I will not complain. I will not ask why you need it. I will not cause any problems. I will just get you every single document that you need, and I hope it's enough. And it was enough. And so the email later that I got back from the lady at the head department said, okay, that was perfect. You will hear back within 3 months. This was in May. So I thought to myself, oh, wow, I might not hear back until August. And then I got a notification on June 5th saying that, just a header saying naturalization. And at this point, what you have to do is you have to go onto the Journal Officiel, which is this official journal that every 2 or 3 days they post every new law that's been published throughout France. And one section of it is anyone who's become French by marriage or by ancestry or by naturalization, which is when you work and apply through this process that I did. And I saw my name. So that's how it was official. So yeah, I just wanted to share with you how I became French by teaching English. It is possible. A lot of people, especially Americans, only know about the TAPIF program, which is teaching assistant program in France. Yes, that's right. Okay. That program is only, I think it's 8 months out of 12 months. And then you have to leave France. And you're paid a very low salary. I think it's like 800 or 900 euros a month. And you are a teaching assistant and you don't get to choose where you get placed. So it's very difficult. And you'll teach more like in a high school. Maitre de Langue and Lectel, it's always at the university level. So you have less behavior management and you can teach more directly the actual material at hand. And then contractual is the same thing, but double the hours. And so I just wanted to share this with you today so that you know that if you ever wanted to leave your country, whether it's the United States or Australia or UK or Canada or wherever, and you want to move to Europe, you want to move to France, and you're not an EU citizen, and you're scared about a visa, and you're wondering, is there a path? Is there a way to move to France permanently? Or am I just dreaming? No, you're not dreaming. I'm living proof of this. You can do it. You don't have to move to France spending all your savings trying to do a education degree and then hoping to find a job afterwards. That is a path that's possible, but it's a bit harder. You don't have to move to France and then rush trying to find a French man or woman to marry to become French, as a lot of people have. I mean, it's great if you can, but you can't count on love. You can be lucky. You can pray and hope. You can line it up, but you can't count on finding the person for you in France, unfortunately. And trying to get citizenship through education, especially the master's, is possible. But when you're learning, you can't work as much as you would like. And finding a job is also an issue. But this path, 5 years of teaching plus 2 or 3 years, it is a viable process. If you're patient enough, if you're flexible enough, if you're able to move from university to university, because the jobs are not always every year. I mean, each university will be hiring every year for Maitre de Langue or Lectel positions, more or less. It depends on the university and the region, but a lot of them almost every year, every 2 years, they'll be hiring. So you can count on those jobs, but there's a lot of competition. For the contractual jobs, it's really depending upon what they need. For example, when I was in, I didn't know this until I got the position and I went there and I moved there and everything. I was only there because I was filling in for 2 employees that had maternity leave. So they had 2 teachers, full-time teachers. And in one semester, one had a baby and left for the full semester. So I was covering her classes. And the second semester, the other lady had a baby and left in that semester. So they traded off, if you will. But once that year was up, both mothers had their babies, their children, They had had their time off. They're ready to come back to their full-time jobs. And I was out of a job. So there was no position for me after 1 year. The position that I'm in now, I was able to extend to a second year in Amiens. But they didn't want to keep on hiring someone contractually. I mean, like I said, there's only 3 years you can do it. Then they have to start paying you all these benefits. And you have to have certain qualifications that you can only get if you're a French citizen. It's called a CAPES or an agrégation. Certain kind of certificates that you need to get, qualifications to allow you to get a permanent post. It's called CDI, a permanent post in France, with all the benefits associated with it. So it's more expensive. That's why it's cheaper for them to hire a contractual. So after the second year I was in Amiens, they found a person to take on the classes full-time. That was easier than them just hiring contractuals. And again, I was out of a job. So it's not easy. But if you're flexible, there are enough jobs in France. And if you apply strategically, fast, and well, with a good CV and a good cover letter or lettre de motivation, I guarantee you, you can do what I did. You can become French. And when you become French, you're not just French, you're European, which means I, and you, dear listener, too, you can work anywhere in Europe. You can work in Switzerland. You can work in Iceland. You can work in Norway. You can work in Luxembourg. You can work in Spain. You can work in Germany. You can work in Poland. You can work in any of the countries in the European Union. And then some. So yeah, so that was my motivation for sharing with you how I became French by teaching English. My backstory, my education, the timeline, working 5 years full-time in France, and then another 2 or 3 years to complete the citizenship process. A bit of the details of the process, my personal journey, and I hope this video motivates you or encourages you to give you some hope to pursue the path that I did, to move to France and teach English as a Maitre de Langue, as a lecteur, as a contractual and beyond. Because living in France is a blessing. I love it so much, or at least living in Europe. Having these opportunities is something I can only dream of. And I hope that you can do the same as well. So thanks so much for watching, for listening. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. I don't post very regularly, but I try to post evergreen content that can be helpful even 5 or 10 years down the road. And my goal here is really just to help anyone who's listening and watching. If you have any comments or questions, please just write the comments down below. I love to hear from you, especially words of encouragement. Any feedback, questions, or words of encouragement in the comments will help encourage me to make more videos. Also, if you want to see any other videos, if you have any other questions about what it was like to live in certain places, or what it was like to apply for these jobs or apply for citizenship or anything like that, just let me know your questions in the comments below. And if you're lucky, I might make a video answering your specific questions. So that's it for today. Thanks so much. Have a great day, and bye.